Yep. Sarah, Alistair, welcome. Sarah.
Good morning, Chair, Councillors, thank you. So the report in front of you today is putting forward some recommended comments on the Ports of Auckland Limited Statement of Corporate Intent. I'll just make a few brief comments. So this is the second Statement of Corporate Intent that the Council has approved since it took direct ownership from the former ACAL. A statement of corporate intent is quite similar to a statement of intent for our CCOs, but obviously the port is not a CCO. But in terms of content, they're very similar. It operates to a slightly different time frame. So the draft must be received by the end of July. We have to provide comments back to the port by August, and then it has to be finally approved in September. Some context, the document's not substantially different from the one last year. The two areas in which it does differ is it includes a new metric on car dwell times, and it also includes some commentary about the level of dividend that the Council will be receiving from the port this year, which is consistent with what you approved in the annual plan a couple of months ago. So obviously there have been some challenges from a commercial perspective recently, and the port is in a capacity building phase, which is part of this is the automation project, and that's limited its capacity to handle freight for a period. So post the automation project, the port is hoping that its capacity, well, it's projecting that its capacity will be significantly increased and its commercial performance will improve. And our feedback is set out in the executive summary in the report, and it's fairly straightforward. So the first item is that the port needs to include a commitment to investigating new solutions for handling car imports and for addressing constraints in the supply chain for container trade. And it should be engaging with the Council on these critical issues. So we will be, post the election, setting up a workshop, a governance workshop between the Ports Board and you as a Council. And the port, another recommendation for feedback is that the port should keep the Council appraised of the ongoing implementation of the automation project and any ongoing risk from that, because it's obviously impacts the port's commercial performance, which impacts the group. And two final things is that the port we are recommending that the port should include a KPI relating to its goal of being carbon neutral by 2025, because without one of those, it's very difficult to establish or the Council to establish if they're actually meeting that, tracking towards that goal, which is an admirable goal. And lastly, we are recommending that the port should, or the Council should provide some feedback to the port that it needs to maintain a close working relationship with the Council on both a strategic and operational level. And just a last note in terms of the process, because of the local election in October, the final version of the Statement of Corporate Intent will be received after the final meeting of this committee before the election. So we're recommending that the consideration of the revised Statement of Corporate Intent is delegated to two of the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and the Chair of this committee. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Member Kaka.
Thank you, through the Chair. Just want to bring our attention to the Māori Impact Statement. It's on page 38 or section 19, and specifically the reference to the removal from the Statement of Corporate Intent reference around the responsiveness, Māori responsiveness plan. So just so I've got it right, what is that straight up? Is that you've removed that Māori intent, or was it a mistake?
So, thank you, and through you, Chair. So the reason that the port has removed that is because we understand their plan is actually nearing completion, and we're expecting to receive it soon. So, kind of going into the new financial year, if that will be complete, then there won't be a need to have that item in the KPIs. And that's that. So it's not a kind of removal of that as an objective. There's still a very clear expectation that the port needs to be responsive to Māori and implement the council's kind of obligations.
Okay, just a supplementary question through the chair. So I'd actually like that point to be re-emphasised in the mayor's letter. Actually, that a KPI that picks that up be included as an addition to your letter. I hear what you're saying, but it's not enough of a guarantee for me. Thank you.
Sarah, can you just turn off that speaker next to you there? And we're going to Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I just wondered, in light of a letter that we've had from Nolene Buckland from Cruise Ship Association, I'm just wondering, and we know that we've got an issue with cruise ships because we've got some uncertainty around the Dolphin now. Is there any way we can indicate to the ports that we would like them to consider, if possible, making space available for the larger cruise ships, like the Ovation of the Seas, because it's just not economically viable to have them moored out in the channel. Is there any way we can indicate that or have conversations with them about that? Because there is a lot of loss of changeover economy here if we don't have places for these things. And also New Zealand, actually, if they don't come to Auckland, they won't come at all.
We'll just get the mayor to respond and then Sarah.
Yeah, if I can just help there. I agree. We do need to be able to berth the larger ships so that we can have the embarkation, disembarkation, including of people that will fly in to do their transfers. That's where we make the real money, and also so that we can load goods on, and the New Zealand products are then to be used on those cruise ships. I'm in the process of talking to the cruise industry at the moment. They've said, it's one thing to put a dolphin in the harbour, but that's only for 15 years. What we'd like is a longer term solution, and they may be prepared to wait for that longer term solution. And one of the longer term solutions is, of course, either Captain Cook Wharf, which means that you'd have to extend it, or even better would be Bledisloe. If we can free the space on Bledisloe, and Captain Cook for that matter, of being a car storage yard. And, I'm in discussions with the chief executive of the ports. He has readily agreed and says that he has some enthusiasm for investigating the prospect of barging cars off the wharf, one, to actually clear the wharfs more quickly, and we need to investigate that and find out what difference we can make. But secondly, also, just to stop hundreds of truck movements hauling cars out, clogging up the bottom of the city centre and the early part of the motorway. So we don't know yet what the outcome will be. Like anything, you need a good business case. But congratulate the ports on being prepared to investigate that. And if we can free up that west side of Bledisloe, even if you're using the north side of Bledisloe, and I've talked to Julie Stout from Urban Auckland on this, if we can put the car ferry on the north edge when they've completed the work there, and the cruise liners on the western edge, that would seem to be the best of all worlds. But we've got to work out whether it's viable, feasible, and makes sense. But I think there's a lot of hope in that investigation.
You missed me, a good progress, and I guess as long as it's in the work plan, I'm comfortable.
Sarah, do you wish to add? No?
No, I don't think I need to add anything.
Okay, we have Councillor Casey, Councillor Bartley, Councillor Darby and Councillor Collins.
It's not really a question. Am I allowed to make comments at this stage, Mr. Chairman?
Why not? Why not? No, okay, we'll come back. No, we'll stick with the questions. No, so we've got.
Okay, my question, I'll make one. Under the outcome safe and empowered people, I see there are 2 performance measures for safety, but none for empowerment. Could you tell me why that might be and what we could do about that? My concern, as I will talk to later, is about the automation process, the loss of jobs, and people needing to be retrained into other positions.
I mean, I can't talk in detail to it, but I guess one comment I would say is that I have heard the port talk about in the past is that empower also means that their staff kind of feel empowered to, make health and safety as a priority in the workplace. So, it might partially refer to that, but I can't make any other comment beyond that.
So it's still in terms of safety. Thank you. I'll talk to you later.
Yep. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this an opportunity where, this is a question, where we can add stuff now? Because I want to follow on from Councillor Casey in terms of retraining staff. And why don't we just have a statement in here that says that we want to reinforce worker safety, training up staff that are displaced because of automation, because I'm mindful that this week is the anniversary of the stevedore that was killed at the ports. So I think we should really amp up the safety, that we want this to be a safe workplace and we don't want any more deaths, even though they have it as a line, but I think we should reinforce that in our letter to them. So my question is, how do we do it?
It's been noted, and I'm hearing some hears around the table, so I think that will be taken on board, and you'll notice in C it is delegated after this meeting because we have to approve it today, subject to any changes such as you've suggested. So I think you can remain confident that will happen. Councillor Darby.
Thanks. Can I just go to page 47 of our agenda? Primary line of communication. I'm just Sorry, thank you. The primary line of communication on page 47, about the third paragraph down, I'm just wondering if that needs to be a little bit more than the CCO governance team. And I'm just wondering if that could also read, and the Mayor of Auckland. And I haven't posed this with you, Mr. Mayor, but I actually think we just do need that political conduit in addition to the conduit through to our management team. So that's one question I wouldn't mind being addressed and included. Then we go to key performance targets. Where is the performance target for moving the light vehicles efficiently through the port? I can see crane rates, ship rates, container rates, and if you could explain those numbers to me on crane rates and ship rates, because they don't actually mean anything to me as a lay reader. If you could explain those. And where is the light vehicle turnaround targets there? That was the second key question. And probably the other one is there's not a strong mention of the place the port has. It talks about the port and its place in Auckland and New Zealand, but we're starting to recognise that the port and any future port it's about its core place supporting the Upper North Island regions. And I'm just wondering whether that's being grabbed strongly enough. And I guess I am thinking of that Upper North Island supply chain strategy work and what the outcomes might be. And I'm just wondering if the narrative within this talks enough of the place the port is, not for Auckland and its owners, yes, that's important, but beyond Auckland, the Auckland region and the Upper North Island. It's the Waikato, it's Northland. And taking into account, of course, the port company's interest in Marsden Maritime. So they're my key areas. Thank you, Chair.
So I'll deal with your first question first. So just to clarify through you, Chair, that was about the light vehicle turnaround time, is that correct? Just can you?
Yeah, sorry, just to go back, key performance targets, I'm struggling to see where is that target for light vehicle, reducing the dwell time for light vehicles?
So there's a KPI under, it's keeping ahead of trade needs. So on the multi-cargo terminal, which is, yeah.
Minus.
Average car dwell times. That's a new KPI this year. And there is a reduction over the next 2 years of the statement of intent, as you can see, but it is obviously a slight reduction. So internationally, the port is already quite reasonably, that's already a reasonably, we understand, a reasonably low dwell time for cars. So does that answer your question?
My oversight, it is there, but boy, it's not very ambitious, is it? It's been that way for a long time.
No,
knocking 0.05% off, days is only an hour or so.
Yeah. I think if that would obviously form part of the work or investigation into alternative methods of dwelling there. So it might be of moving cars off the wharf. So it might be we can include a comment about whether that would reduce the dwell time.
Okay, without going into the detail, Chair, and we shouldn't be right now, but I think that area needs a bit more work. We need to be more ambitious in that space, and that's why the PDS investigation has been strongly emphasised by the Mayor. We need to get that efficiency up substantially, not tweak it by 1 hour or so, as the 2022 target is. Second question, well, where I started actually was including under primary line of communication and adding the words "and the Mayor of Auckland."
Sorry, that was your first question. There is absolutely no objection to that, and we can do that. But I understand the Mayor already has a sort of ongoing catch-ups with the Chair, and obviously is communicating with the port as well. But that's a fair thing to include it in the document.
That would formalise it, Mr. Chair, I think, and then it's not an informal.
It is, sorry, just to add, it is in the memorandum of understanding between the port and the council, but including it in the document is no issue.
Okay, and look, probably the last area, Chair, is just around this question of we've got under nature and scope of activity services and facilities to support the cruise ship industry. Does that say strongly enough that there's an expectation that we ask for them to use their existing berth space more efficiently to accommodate all ships? So I guess what I'm aiming at there is there's on the edge of Bledisloe and other parts of Bledisloe, on the western edge of Bledisloe, there's opportunity. If they use their berthage efficiently, there's the possibility of having particularly mega crews go there. So where do we say here that we want them to use their berthage efficiently for all types of shipping, wherever possible?
So I think that goes back to what the Mayor discussed earlier about investigating alternative methods of barging cars off and then using space for cruise ships. So I think perhaps what I would recommend is that we would need to elaborate and describe what the council's actual objectives are in the letter that is sent to the port. So because obviously moving the cars or looking at different ways of moving cars is one thing, but why you're doing it is obviously that needs to be front and centre, and I appreciate it may not be as clear in my report as it should be. So I think if we're describing the outcome as more efficient way of using the wharf space and berthage, including to accommodate the larger cruise ships, then we can work on some wording for that.
If that's the outcome and others support that, the Mayor obviously is leading that. I support that as well. At the moment it's missing chair, and it would be great to have that reinforced.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Chair. Just two questions. I was just wondering if the Ports of Auckland is a signatory to the Youth Pledge.
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you, sorry, Councillor. I'm not sure.
Cool. I just thought I'd ask. I have a question about diversity and inclusion, which is page 43, bullet point 3. You've got the comment diversity and inclusion to leverage for competitive advantage. And then in the next page, there's a table of key targets, of which the diversity and inclusion target isn't there. I was wondering if you could give us an idea of what you are suggesting from both that comment, and if there were ways that the port would be up to looking at some targets for diversity and inclusion.
Through the chair, look, I think that would be a discussion we'd have to have with the ports, because we're just not sure where they're at with their diversity and inclusion work within it. So to get something meaningful and sensible in there, I think that's a discussion we'll have to have with them.
Councillor Lee.
I think we have to recognise that the governance structure of Ports of Auckland is somewhat different than what it was at the start of 2017. Ports has no intervening governance structure as it had for a number of years, and so the management and directors of the port itself have achieved, through council decisions, quite a lot of latitude. I don't think it's satisfactory in terms of our responsibilities as the governing body. And I believe the Ports of Auckland, as we agreed that CRL Limited should report to the governing body or committee thereof on a quarterly basis at least. It's fine talking to the mayor, that will happen anyway, but the ports does need to answer to the owners, which is the council and the people of Auckland. And so I would urge that in this document that there is some reference for reporting. Now, we had a report from Ports, one of the rare ones in this term, announcing that they were going to slash their dividend, just like that. And I have to say, I thought it quite unsatisfactory. It wasn't any of the directors. It wasn't even the chief executive. It was a middle manager came along and made that announcement. I don't believe that's satisfactory. And we, members of the governing body, are not doing our job if we let them get away with it. So that's the first point. The other point I would make is that I agree with other members around the room that we ourselves can encourage ports to resolve the current dispute, which is dividing Auckland around the berthing of mega cruise ships. Part of the problem is ports are supporting the dolphin, I believe, because in effect it is not really a dolphin but a wharf extension. And as we all know, and we recall the controversies of a few years ago, Ports has plans to reclaim or extend or both into the harbour. And if a precedent is created with this dolphin come wharf extension, then we're likely to see pressure from the ports to start reclaiming all over again. I think we need to step in and encourage a settlement. And I hear members around the room talking about Bledisloe Wharf, and I think it's a sensible approach. But with one difference, I believe that the 90% at least of normal-sized cruise ships could still berth at Queen's Wharf with convenience, with conveniently close to downtown shops and so on, and transport links, but that the mega size Quantum class and Oasis class cruise ships, which come here relatively rarely, though it'll increase somewhat, but the percentage will not be great. They could be berthed at Bledisloe Wharf and save the problem, save all the angst over the dolphin situation. So I'm asking for two things here, but primarily we need to lift our game in terms of governance. And I make the parallel with CRL Limited. That's been, no hands have been on the wheel for some time, and we saw $1 billion blowout in the CRL. We need to get closer governance and scrutiny and accountability, we, the governing body from Ports of Auckland. Thank you.
Right. I don't think there's any more feedback, but we've noted some of the observations and things. So, oh, sorry, Councillor.
So I can't let the councillor's comments on CRL go without some commentary. And the $1 billion he referred to, half share between the Crown and ourselves, related to $280 million worth of future proofing, with putting 9 car sets into the ground to give the capacity going into the way distant grandchildren future, and a doubling or more of the contingency fund, and the rest was increases in construction prices. And there is strong oversight on CRLL, despite the members' accusations.
I beg to differ.
Right, well, I was just going to let Councillor Lees slide away, but we've had further comments, and Councillor Collins, not about that same subject, please.
No, it's
because
not.
that is outside the scope.
Chair, it's probably a question for you. I was just wondering, so there's been things where we're going to get some feedback on it. Is it possible just to get a quick email from someone at some stage just to say this is what we added or didn't add to the document? Hey, just so that we know that it was followed up and stuff. Thanks, Chair.
That will come from Sarah and Alistair. Right, comments. And we're not commenting on CRL. No. Mayor Goff.
Certainly not commenting about CRL, Mr Chairman, nor the fact that we all voted in favour of the future proofing of it. I want to say that I think there's some good additions here. I've talked about the getting the cars off the wharf, and I think maybe it was Councillor Darby that made the comment about that. Ports have looked at trying to use rail and it doesn't work. You could do more at night if the receiving depots off-wharf were open 24 hours and they're not, which is why you come down to the barges in the end and say, actually, PTS would operate extended hours and can get the cars by barge up to Highbrook. And if that works, that would solve a number of different problems. I'm not preempting the investigation, but it's true to say that we are encouraging the port with that investigation. I think, Alistair, we're not able to direct under the Ports Companies Act and on a number of things that we've talked around this table. I do say that the removal of ASIL at least gives us direct contact with the port that we didn't have before. But I think we should have more sessions with the ports, as Councillor Lee has suggested, in terms of what we can find out by the workshops and by that information. And what we found out at the last workshop was that you don't have to leave the cars on the wharf for customs or quarantine. It is purely a logistic problem. If we can overcome the logistic problem, we can get the cars off the wharves. On environmental performance, I want to give a bouquet to the ports. I think that they are being innovative in what they're trying to do. We launched the other day down the wharf the proposal to purchase an electric tug. It will be the first fully powered, full-size electric tug in the world, and we'll be leading the way on that. And will it cost more? Capital cost, yes. Will it cost more over the life of the vehicle? No, we'll save a couple of $1 million, and that's a couple of $1 million effectively to the shareholder as well as the port. And also want to acknowledge that the port has done some great work in developing plans for a hydrogen plant that we'll be able to use to pilot hydrogen buses through Auckland Transport. Corporate behaviour, I just think that there needs to be better communication between Ports of Auckland and some of the CCOs. I don't expect them to be communicating through the media. I do expect them to be talking to each other. For God's sake, start that. It might not be the fault on one side, might be coming from either side. But I want to see council-owned organisations talking to each other and relating to each other and getting the best for the city and not taking pot shots through the media. So I simply make those 3 points. There's a lot of things that we might like to do in terms of directing the port, but we do operate under the legislation of the Port Companies Act, and that restricts us in direction. They are required to operate commercially, but if I finish on this point, if the ports weren't to consider barging the cars off the wharves, and we weren't to improve that dwell time, which I agree with Councillor Darby is minuscule, then the ports risk a supply chain study saying we'll take the cars off you altogether. And anyone that can't see that would have to be willfully blind, and that's a critical reason why we've got to look at doing it better. But the main critical reason is if we can free that space up on Bledisloe, and if we could use that for the cruise liners, then that would be the best of all possible worlds. Now, I can't guarantee that it'll happen, but we've done enough work on it to suggest that it could happen, and it could well be not only feasible, but hugely beneficial to the city in every aspect. And I welcome the port's agreement that they will work on that and they'll put some enthusiasm behind the idea. I think that's a big step forward to where we were just months ago.
Councillor Casey, to conclude the debate.
All right. Back in March, we had a workshop at the ports to look at it was mainly to look at their automation process, and that's when we heard that our dividend was going to be reduced. Since then, I've met with the Maritime Union and representatives from the Australian Maritime Unions, and the one thing that bothered me about the workshop, and it hasn't been resolved yet, is I'm not able. I'm a representative. I'm representative of the people who own the port, but I can't tell you about the port's automation process. I don't know if it's full automation or part. We got some videos about retraining workers. I don't know how many workers are involved in the retraining process. I don't know if that's been successful or not. And a few councillors, including myself, have raised with you that part of, in this strategy document, which is the only tool really that we have of control in this statement of corporate intent, that first outcome, safe and empowered people, there are measures for safety. But there are 2 bullet points I'd like to talk about. One is structures and systems for an engaged and well-skilled workforce. What does that actually mean when the ports is going through a restructuring process caused by either part or full automation? Because I'll come back to that. And the second part, as Councillor Collins raised, is diversity and inclusion leveraged for competitive advantage. I have absolutely no idea what that means. Not only do I not know what that means, I don't know how diverse their workforce is because they couldn't tell me. They couldn't tell me how big the workforce was, nor how it was made up. So I'm still waiting for that information. So just on that, if we are to fulfil if I am to fulfil my role as an overseer of ports through this Auckland Council, I would very much like some surety about job losses, for example, and that retraining process. Showing us a video is not enough. And I know that this is the end of the process, but I'm suggesting that in the letter that goes with the statement of intent, when we finalise it, because it's too late to put it in the statement of intent, that we raise the issue of needing to know more about workforce and the intentions of port. My understanding, and this is just the other part of this, is that the dividend has reduced and we've been given an explanation for that reduction. But my understanding from my meetings with the maritime unions collectively is that automation doesn't increase productivity, and it's been shown overseas. It's been shown in every port in Australia that's been automated. productivity has gone down, dividends have gone down continually year on year. Now, if that is the case, I want to talk about that with Ports of Auckland, because I have no idea what their timeline looks like with regard to their workshop or their productivity or the dividend. Is this the start of the rot? So yeah, all those questions I think I'm entitled to ask and have answered in their presence, and I look forward to further dialogue. But if the Mayor could maybe talk to how that could be incorporated, that concern, which I think is shared by other councillors, could be incorporated into any correspondence with ports, so that we can have future dialogue that gives me some comfort that there will be no substantial job losses through automation.
Councillor Casey, you're talking post-election, one assumes, yes?
I'm coming back.
Yeah, no, I know, but no.
I'm not going away.
Well, we now know there's three of you. Okay, right. Were there any further comments? There was
Some response, really, because
Well,
I don't want to raise all of that and then nothing
that was my
happens.
response to you. Were you meaning post-election, when we would arrange presumably another workshop about this? And
Well, when
maybe
we,
the
sorry,
Mayor will-
what's the
Mayor will
process
respond to
today
you.
when we sign this away? We do have to communicate with ports about it.
So can I can talk to that. So when ACR was disestablished, a memorandum of understanding set up the sort of frequency of communication and engagement between the council and the port, and that includes a once annual governance workshop. So I think if there's an intention to change that, or to increase the frequency, or even just to ask the port to come in and explain a few more things, then that needs to be included in the letter that goes back to them on this statement of corporate intent.
Yep, Mayor.
Just to add to what Sarah said, and I think Councillor Casey raises a good point, and somebody else raised the point before that. I think that the workshop, we didn't always like what we heard, but it was useful to be there to hear it and to learn things that we didn't know. And I'd be keen if we could, once a year seems a little infrequent to me, that to do it twice a year would be a good idea. And I think the expectation is that you'd have the chair of the board and the chief executive there at that meeting. We are the shareholders, so I just need to ensure that I get the advice from our officers that we are not infringing on the statutory limits on what we're able to do. But as the shareholders, are we entitled to that feedback? Yes. Do I know whether automation is going to produce all the things that have been promised from it? The port said we have a competitiveness problem. That's why we've lost a Maersk line. That's hit our bottom line. A port's no use to us if it's not competitive. But it's a little bit like an act of faith to say, well, they're making the decision about automation. Well, they do. That's their job. They're the management, but we're entitled to have that reported to us and for them to be available for us to question them on it. So, I'm sympathetic to Councillor Casey's point, and I think if we could make sure that we had 6 monthly meetings, that would be far better than an annual meeting. I think that'd be worthwhile, and with the expectation that the chief executive and the chair of the board would be there at those meetings.
Right, we've now got a little bit of a roll call again, so we've got Member Coker and then Councillor Bartley, but the aim is to have a 5-minute break and then come back and try and knock off the whole program before lunch. So it's up to you guys, Member Coker.
Thank you. It's just a quick question. It's really just to be clear around what is going into the, we say we're going to delegate the authority to the Mayor to engage in these, finalise a letter. So it's just following on from Councillor Collins' question. There's been a number of things raised. I just want to make sure that they've all been included. So yes, Councillor Collins said that an email might come out, but actually I just wouldn't mind a summary of what you've got in bullet point 4, maybe, Mayor, just so I'm clear.
I'd be in favour of that. I understand that it has to be delegated because of the time frame, but I think every councillor needs to be aware of what we're putting into it prior to my signature on it. We won't have the ability to relitigate it, but you need to be informed about what's there, and I'm happy for officers to make sure that all members of this committee receive an update on what's going to go into that reply on the statement of intent put forward.
All right, so what if anything hasn't been picked or missed by Sarah? Dave behind me no doubt has got a note on that as well, so between everyone I'm sure you'll get the full summation. Councillor Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Mr Chair. No, you were saying to be confident that the points will be picked up, so I'm confident now given the question from Member Kake. Thank you.
Right, we have a mover and a seconder. I'm going to put that. All those in favour? No. Against? No. Good. Right, we'll just do this one little item, council-controlled organisation exemptions, number 12, and then we were just going to have a 5-minute